felt misunderstood by your parents? Wait until you hear what Lily went through. Shocking.
Imagine this. You walk into a courtroom in full military uniform. Your parents are sitting there, staring at you in disbelief. They thought you would quit the Navy. But today, they're about to find out just how wrong they were. My name's Lily Davis. I was just 18 when I enlisted in the Navy, hoping to make my family proud. I was the daughter they always wanted me to be, disciplined, committed, driven. But over time, things started to change. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. At first, my parents were so supportive. They saw the Navy as a chance for me to grow, to build a future. They never doubted me. But soon, they started noticing something. The calls stopped coming. I wasn't replying to texts. I was isolated, more withdrawn, and they didn't understand why. They assumed I'd given up. They thought I couldn't handle it, that the pressure broke me. But the truth was far more complicated. My parents thought I had quit, but what they didn't know was that I was part of something bigger, something that would shake everything I knew about myself and the people who had been with me since the beginning. For months, I was silent, staying away, not talking to them, not even answering their calls. My mom and dad began calling me a failure. "You didn't even last a year, did you?" my mom would say on the phone, the disappointment in her voice cutting me deeper than any Navy training ever could. It made sense to them. I must have given up. But they didn't know the real story. I couldn't tell them what had really been happening in my life. I couldn't share the truth. I was afraid they'd never understand. So, I stayed silent. But then, something happened. I got a letter, a summons to court. This was it, the moment where everything I had kept hidden would finally come out. My parents would find out the truth, but not in the way I had imagined. I had no idea how they'd react. Would they be angry? Hurt? Or maybe, just maybe, would they finally understand? I had no choice but to show up. The date was set, and I walked into that courtroom, boots echoing against the floor. My parents were sitting there, staring at me, confused. They had no idea. They thought they had already lost me. But what happened next shattered everything they thought they knew about me. I wasn't just a failure. I wasn't a quitter. I was something far more than they could ever imagine. And in that moment, I realized nothing would ever be the same again.
Wait, so Lily didn't quit the Navy. She's been hiding something big this whole time. But why didn't she tell her parents? What really happened? Let's see if we find out.
It wasn't just about proving myself to my parents anymore. It was about proving to myself that I hadn't failed. But at what cost? Losing touch with my parents wasn't something I wanted to do. But the longer I stayed away, the harder it became to tell them the truth. When I first joined the Navy, I thought it would be this exciting adventure, a challenge that would push me to be the best version of myself. But it wasn't like the recruiters had promised. The pressure was suffocating. Every day the demands got heavier, and every night I'd question whether I made the right choice. Sure, I was strong, but I wasn't immune to the doubts that crept in. The endless drills, the harsh criticisms, the never-ending pressure. It broke me in ways I couldn't explain. So, I began to retreat. I stopped reaching out to my parents. My mother's phone calls became a reminder of what I had to keep hidden. The longer I stayed silent, the more it felt like I was betraying them. And then came the rumors. My unit started talking, whispers about my failure. I overheard one of the older sailors say, "I heard Davis gave up. She couldn't hack it." That was it. That was the moment I realized how easily people would write you off when they didn't understand your struggle. I couldn't let my parents hear that, so I cut them out. I convinced myself that if they didn't hear from me, they'd think I was fine. But they didn't. Instead, they thought I quit. They thought I was weak. They called me a failure. Every message, every voicemail, it all echoed in my mind as I stayed silent. But the worst part? I couldn't find the courage to tell them the truth. The truth that I wasn't a failure, that I was fighting something much bigger than I could explain. Then, one day, I got that letter. It was a court summons. My heart sank when I saw it. This wasn't just a simple discharge. This was bigger than that. They wanted me in court, and I knew this was my only chance to confront the past, to show my parents that I wasn't who they thought I was. But as I looked at the letter, the fear hit me. Would they still believe in me once they found out the truth? Or was it too late to fix everything?
So hold on. Lily was part of a classified mission, but why was she not allowed to tell her parents? What else was she hiding? This just got way more complicated. Let's dive deeper.
I had a choice to make. Face my parents and reveal the truth, or stay quiet and let them think I was a failure. But walking into that courtroom changed everything. The day of the court hearing arrived faster than I expected. My heart was racing. The military court wasn't just about settling my discharge. It was about confronting everything I had been avoiding. This wasn't going to be a simple meeting. It was my moment to reveal my truth, and it terrified me. I put on my uniform. I had always been proud of wearing it, the pride of being part of something larger, something meaningful. But today, it felt like a shield. My parents didn't know this part of me. They only knew the girl who had called them, telling them I was struggling and just needed a break. They didn't know I had been part of classified missions, operations so sensitive that the public had no idea. They didn't know how hard I fought, not just for my country, but for my sanity. As I got ready that morning, the weight of what I had to do sunk in. I wasn't just walking into a courtroom. I was walking into a battle for my dignity, for my family's understanding. My parents had no idea that I was still a Navy officer, still in active service. I hadn't quit. I had been on an operation, one that required me to disappear for months. I couldn't tell them that. No one could know. The mission was classified, and the Navy kept me under wraps until the court order made it public. But as I stood there, preparing to leave for the hearing, I realized one thing. I couldn't walk into that courtroom and pretend I wasn't scared. The truth would be painful for them to hear. Would they still love me? Would they believe in me again? The stakes were high, not just for my career, but for my relationship with my parents. Walking into that courtroom felt like stepping into a battlefield. I wasn't sure if I would be welcomed back as a daughter, or if I'd be seen as the failure they'd already made up their minds about. Every step I took toward that courtroom door felt heavier, as if it were leading me toward an uncertain future. Would they embrace me? Or would they look at me like I was a stranger? I was about to find out. I walked into the courtroom, boots clicking sharply against the floor. The sound echoed through the room, and I could feel all eyes on me. My parents sat in the front row. Their eyes were wide with confusion. They didn't know what to expect, but their expressions slowly morphed from surprise to disbelief. The room went quiet as I took my place, and as the judge began to speak, everything changed. This wasn't just a case about my discharge. It was about to become the moment that revealed everything. The moment my parents would finally understand the truth.
Wait a minute. So her parents are finally hearing the truth, but why do they still seem shocked? If Lydia was truly part of a secret mission, why does it feel so off? What's next?
The room went deathly silent. My parents stared at me, their faces filled with confusion. They didn't know what to think anymore. And then, the truth hit them like a ton of bricks. As the judge began to read off the case details, I could feel the tension in the room tightening. My parents had been staring at me for what felt like hours, trying to piece together what was happening. They were still in shock. They had no idea that their daughter, the one they thought had failed, was standing there in front of them as an active Navy officer, not a quitter. The judge cleared his throat and spoke. "Seaman Davis, the reason for your absence is not what was initially thought by the public. You were part of a classified mission. For national security reasons, your identity and status had to remain undisclosed for several months." I watched as my parents' faces transformed from disbelief to a mix of awe and regret. This wasn't the failure they had imagined. This wasn't the daughter who couldn't handle the pressure. I was part of something much bigger. Something that no one could have prepared me for. The judge continued. "Your service record has been exemplary, and your mission was completed successfully. The reason you were out of contact with your family is due to security protocols. You were following orders." The truth was out. My parents finally heard it. I wasn't just hiding from them. I'd been fulfilling my duties, serving my country, and risking everything. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. My mother's eyes welled with tears, and my father's face hardened, though I could see the guilt slowly creeping in. As the reality of my situation hit them, I could see the regret building. My mom's hand shot up to her mouth, her eyes wide with realization. You didn't quit?" she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. My father, sitting next to her, gripped the edge of his seat, unable to look at me directly. It was clear now that they understood. But what they didn't know was how much they had hurt me in those months of silence, calling me a failure without knowing the truth. The weight of that feeling had haunted me, feeling like I wasn't enough, like I was a disappointment. But now, it felt like a door was finally opening. They were seeing me for who I truly was. I wasn't sure how to feel. On one hand, I was relieved that they knew the truth. On the other, I was afraid. Afraid of how they would react to everything I'd been through. As the court hearing came to a close, the judge asked me if I had anything to add. My parents' eyes were locked on mine, and I could feel the weight of their gaze. I wanted to speak, to finally say everything that had been trapped inside me for so long. But would it be enough to repair the damage done? Would they ever see me the same way again? The judge wrapped up the hearing, officially clearing my name and reinstating my status within the Navy. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. The legal questions had been answered. I hadn't quit. I wasn't a failure. I had been serving in a highly classified capacity, and it was only because of the court summons that the truth came out. But as the formalities were concluded, the real battle was just beginning. The truth wasn't just about military service. It was about my relationship with my parents. They had believed the worst about me for so long, and now they had to come to terms with that. I wasn't sure if the damage was fixable, but I knew this was a turning point. No more secrets, no more silence. As I left the courtroom, my parents followed me. My mother was the first to speak, her voice trembling. "Lily, I didn't know. I thought I had lost you." My father remained quiet, his gaze focused on the ground. His silence said everything. He was ashamed of how he had reacted, how quickly he had doubted me without knowing the truth. I had spent so many months holding my breath, waiting for the moment when I would finally be seen for who I was. And now, here it was. My mother pulled me into a tight hug, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Lily. I was wrong. I never should have doubted you." For the first time in months, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear those words. My father, still silent, stepped forward and placed a hand on my shoulder. I looked up at him, and for the first time, he didn't look at me with disappointment. There was something softer there. Regret, but also pride. He nodded, barely able to speak through the lump in his throat. "I'm proud of you," he said. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. They hadn't understood my journey until now, but at least they were trying to. And that meant everything. The consequences of everything that had happened weren't immediate, but they were real. My relationship with my parents would never be the same. We had to rebuild trust, which took time. But for the first time in years, I felt like we were on the same page. My parents now saw me not as a failure, but as someone who had been fighting battles they never understood. They had to reconcile with their judgments, and I had to find forgiveness. In the days that followed, I kept in touch with them more regularly, sharing bits and pieces of my life. We started talking again, really talking. It wasn't easy, but it was healing. My life after that day wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't perfect. But as I walked out of the courthouse, my parents beside me, I felt like I could finally breathe. For so long, I had been carrying the weight of their disappointment on my shoulders. But now, we were starting over, with a better understanding of who I really was. The journey wasn't over, but I was no longer alone in it. We reached the parking lot, and my mom squeezed my hand. "We'll always be here for you, Lily," she said softly. And in that moment, I knew things had changed. I had fought for my truth, and now I was fighting for a future where my family truly understood who I was. And for the first time in a long time, I had hope.
Do you think Lily's parents truly understand her now? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.